Hi guys, so more from me. One thing that I wanted to look at, and I feel like it's unhelpful, and I have talked about it before, but I feel like it needs a proper video done on it because I feel like people are not getting the picture. And once again, autism gets put in a dangerous light, and that is comparing autism to psychopathy. So I've already made a video talking about the official DSM-5 criteria, where it says the difference between autism and psychopathy, and you can check that out. I put a lot of thought and effort into it, and basically, Professor Baron Cohen, what the main summary was that autistic people can be lower in cognitive empathy. So cognitive meaning recognizing, so picking up on facial cues and different things. So if someone, this happened to me personally, so I know, but if someone nudges their head like that to say, come over, that went way over my head before. And how it affected me negatively was it was a guy doing it from a friend group, and one of the girls in the friend group was someone I fancied. So that's how it negatively impacted me. So there's that, so we don't recognize necessarily what people are going through, cognitive empathy, and then there's emotional empathy. And what that is to actually know that someone is suffering and go over and help them, which a lot of autistic people do. And I mentioned a lot of channels like Adult with Autism, Paul. I always say that because if you say adult with autism and you type it in, it doesn't pop up. But if I put his name in, bald guy with a big, nice beard from Manchester in the northwest of England. And there's Adelaide Alchemist. Was just watching a video actually from Autismatic Quinn. Very upsetting video, I have to say, talking about how he was basically picked on by his younger brother and scapegoat in many ways, and not nice to hear, you know. But I keep hearing this thing of overlap with autism and psychopathy, and I'm not saying someone with autism can't be a psychopath, but the assumption that the two are, you know, joined at the hip is very dangerous, and I hate that it's put up there. I think cases like Jeffrey Dahmer's, where autism got a lot of the blame for the reason why he did the horrific things that he did. It's not fair, it's unjustified, and I think it's just wrong. It's just another stereotype that we don't need. Basically, making out that autistic people are emotionless wrecks or emotionless robots that will take advantage of people. And that's the difference right there. So we lack cognitive empathy. I've learned facial cues over the years, and you can do it. You can definitely do it. And with practice, you begin to recognize the signs and you understand what it is. But with emotional empathy, autistic people score quite high in that, because in order to mask in the first place, and the way that we do it, and this is where I can kind of understand where people see the overlap between the two conditions, autism and psychopathy, because we have a mask and they have a mask. But the difference is we're masking for your benefit so that you don't have to see us at our worst, all the things that cause us discomfort. And as someone who's been very burnt out recently and for a while, I can testify to that. It's exhausting, and the annoying part is that everybody thinks everything is fine because you present like everything is fine. Everything is not fine, not with me. And it hasn't been for a while, but I'm really feeling it now. Unfortunately, it's getting on top of me, and that's because I take on the weight of the world's problems. I feel the pain and suffering going on in the world, and as much as people say snap out of it or just get on with it, you've got to just think of yourself and look after number one. As much as that would help me, I can't do it, and therein lies the difference. I'm masking so that I don't make people feel uncomfortable. Where someone who's a psychopath is going to mask so they can extract, manipulate, take from other people. And if you don't believe me, people who have the condition or sociopathy as well, there's a debate whether one is nature, one is nurture. The official diagnosis is antisocial personality disorder, which doesn't mean you don't like socializing. In fact, quite the opposite. You can appear very confident and you can take a lot from other people, which I think a lot of autistic people are not interested in. We don't want to get big and succeed at the expense of other people. You know, we live by a very rule based system, and psychopathy and sociopathy, by their very nature, is all about breaking rules, which completely messes up our brains if we try and break a rule. And I can say that for sure. That's not saying that we can't do it and we're incapable of doing it, but it's certainly not as common. And autism by itself doesn't cause people to break rules, but psychopathy and sociopathy certainly do. And people with it are very parasitic in nature, they just keep taking from other people and they don't give anything back. They don't feel like they have to give anything back. Now they can give you the whole spiel of, yeah, I give so much and I work hard, because therein lies the difference. They have cognitive empathy. In fact, they've got quite good cognitive empathy. They can see what people are going through and they're like, oh, that person's feeling this. I'll morph myself into what they want now, and then I can extract. We all expect to see this monster, but they're going to give us what we want to see. And then we're surprised when they take advantage of us. And what baffles me is that there are channels where people are literally admitting that they're a psychopath, and people are still saying, oh, everybody deserves a second chance. And, they're getting into business with them saying, oh, he's a good guy. And then if they get ripped off, they're shocked, they're hurt. So let's have a look. So let's have a look at the criteria, because I don't want you just to take my word for it. And we all know, like, I can talk about autism till the cows come home, my own experience, but this is something I want you just to see. The definition. Let's just look up the definition right now. A persistent pattern of antisocial, impulsive, manipulative, and sometimes aggressive behavior, sometimes described as a personality disorder, not in current technical use. And we look at sociopathy. Sociologos. Sociopath is typically defined as someone who exhibits a pattern of antisocial behaviors and attitudes, including manipulation, deceit, aggression, and lack of empathy for others. This term is often associated with antisocial personality disorder, where individuals show little to no conscience and disregard societal norms. Sociopathy is not a formal diagnosis, but is commonly used to describe behaviors that significantly deviate from societal expectations. Okay. Let's see if we can get an article from it. And there's a few videos recommended down here. Hearing a lot of negative stuff about this channel, Dr. Todd Grande. The reason being is that he doesn't actually have a formal degree in psychology or psychiatry, and he's using the doctor title. He does have a degree that gives him a doctorate, so the title is okay, but it's misleading. And like, I don't have a degree. I don't have doctor before my name, but I'm not claiming to. I'm just talking about this, and I'm looking up articles basically to back up what I'm saying. Here we are now. So here we have it. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by a range of dysfunctional interpersonal, emotional, lifestyle, and antisocial tendencies. People with psychopathy often show a lack of empathy or remorse alongside impulsivity, manipulativeness, and deceitfulness. Psychologists often use the psychopathy checklist and then under 2013 revised PCLR, which groups psychopathic features into factors of personality and behavior. The personality factor includes charm, deceitfulness, manipulativeness, remorselessness, emotional shallowness, and lack of empathy. There's a lot of listlessness. The behavioral factor includes thrill seeking, impulsiveness, irresponsibility, poor self control, early behavioral issues, and criminality. Cognitive behavior therapy is a common treatment, though many psychologists consider the disorder extremely resistant to treatment. And the reason for that is because they don't see themselves as having a problem because they're amazing. They're so much smarter and better than everybody else. So why would I need to change? It's everybody else that's the problem, not me. I've talked about antisocial personality disorder. That's the official diagnosis someone will get, but they'll also be labeled as psychopath or sociopath normally when they get that. If I'm not mistaken, it's not the medical term. Anyway, so psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by. Do we not just read that? Yeah, we already read through that. So they're impulsive, lack empathy, thrill seeking at the expense of other people, poor self control, and early behavioral issues, and criminality. So when you think to yourself, autism requires structure. Sorry, one sec. We have to have an order of things. Routine is important. Otherwise, our brains go to shit. Whereas these guys are impulsive right off the bat. They break rules by our very nature. Rules are an order of things that work for our neurological disorder. So there's a difference right there. Autism is a neurological disorder or a neurodevelopmental disorder. We develop later, we're a bit more childish, maybe, we reach certain milestones slower than other people. Me with driving, for instance. Because I find multitasking extremely difficult. We want to just look at here how it's different from other mental disorders. So psychopathy is a personality disorder characterized by a distinct combination of dysfunctional interpersonal, emotional, lifestyle, and antisocial traits. Unlike other mental disorders, psychopathy is distinguished by a marked lack of genuine emotional attachments to others. There you go, right there. So it often annoys me when I hear people who get into business with people like this. Some of them are diagnosed, and yet people will still get into business with them. They don't care about you. Not only that, they're incapable of caring about you, at least not genuinely, but they're excellent at faking it. Fake it till you make it. And because a lot of these people rule the world, who rules the world? Girls? No, fucking psychopaths. Psychopaths often form artificial, shallow relationships that they exploit for personal gain, and they can appear glib and charming. So they're good at giving you what you want, saying what they need to say to get what they want and extracting it from you. While sharing features with antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders, psychopaths are distinguished by their ability to maintain a semblance of a normal life and a tendency to carefully plan criminal activities. So there you have it right there. And once again, I'm saying I'm not a doctor, so that's why I'm reading out this stuff. If anyone has more knowledge on the matter, let me know. But the reason why it annoys me to hear this being compared to autism is this is parasitic in nature. You know, someone like this, their instinct is, what do I want? I don't give a fuck about what you want, and I'm incapable of caring. It's not my problem, it's your problem. And if you want to know more about this, there's a series of interviews with Dr. James Fallon, who is himself a psychopath. But when he's asked, "Are you a trustworthy person?" he then deflects that and goes, "I wouldn't say that I'm untrustworthy. Other people don't trust themselves with me." It's just constant bullshit and lies, you know what I mean? And a lot of the comments, like I was thinking, oh, well, what's he trying to get at here? And then the comment section was just saying, it's a simple yes or no. And I was kind of thinking, that's a great point. He's given all this fucking word spiel and glib because he's trying to deflect from the question. The more he talks, the more our mind goes off the question. Excellent manipulators. That's the thing. People think that they're going to spot them and know, but you're not, because they're very good at what they do, because they have cognitive empathy. And that's the important distinction. If someone, that's why someone gets the insanity plea when they're psychotic, because they didn't know right from wrong. These guys know right from wrong. They just don't give a shit. It's been proven, by people far more qualified than me. And the thing is, they appear fearless. They appear strong, strong-willed. And I think that's what's very attractive about them, because they're not nervous. They don't really come across as anxious or worried. And why I say that is because, and I mean, it's backed up by interviews and the way they say it themselves, they're actually expressing how they feel. And they say their ability to recall events in the past is very limited. They're not very good at going back into the past or planning for the future. That's why they're so impulsive. They can't think out things very well, but they're very good at planning stuff. Like it said it there. I'll just go back up. Having a bank, for instance, plan criminal activities because there's something in it for them. And I talked about Jake the Bus before, from Once Were Warriors, a Maori film. Kia ora whānau, if there's any Maori people watching. Really good people. I do love Pacific Islanders. Malachi Cassie, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I'll put a link to the channel. I like the guy. He's Fijian, Cantonese, or sorry, Tongan, Cantonese, Maori, Maori, and Tongan as well. There's a lot going on in there. But he talks a lot about his mental health, and I think it's good. Pacific Islanders are very giving and generous people. But when I talk about Jake the Bus in Once Were Warriors, and I'll park that for a second and I'll come back to that and I will remember. But just in case I forget, because my mind is all over the shop, Jake the Bus is living in a impoverished Maori community, and I would say he has a lot of antisocial traits. Don't know if he's necessarily diagnosed with anything, but he's very confident. He's very capable of defending himself, and he quits his job. He doesn't care that he's quit his job and his family might suffer. He says, "I'll just go in the doll." So he doesn't feel any obligation to provide for anybody. He expects his wife to cook for him, not answer him back, and to clean the house whenever he wants. And then also, whenever he demands sex, if she doesn't put out, then he gets very angry. He lets his friends talk to her like shit because a woman should know her place. That's how he acts, you know. When his son gets beaten up by a rival gang, he doesn't care. You know, there's no sense of I should go and help my son. And yet, when there's a pretty lady who's singing in his local bar, you know, and a big fella, another Pacific Island looking guy, a big scary dude, starts playing music on the jukebox, Jake's obviously pissed off because he wants to listen to your woman sing and he's obviously trying to impress her for his own gain. He's over like that to beat up the fella, which he does. So he's fearless, you know, and everybody is afraid of him for good reason. But unless it serves his needs, unless he cares about something, he's not obligated in any way to protect him. He doesn't feel obliged. He can do it. He's more than capable of doing it. He just doesn't care. You know, that's the difference. Why would I help you out when it puts me out? But if there was an object of his or a personal item of his that had been stolen, then I'd say be over like a shot to get it back or do whatever he had to do. But because his son is a human being, he can sort himself out. He can look after his own problems. I don't care, you know. So yeah, we're looking at psychopathy here. Personality disorder characterized by a set of dysfunctional, okay, persons suffering from psychopathy, sometimes called psychopaths, commonly exhibit a lack of empathy or remorse and manifest impulsiveness, manipulativeness. Yeah, we went along with this. In addition, psychopathy leads some persons to commit criminal offences. In psychology and personality theory, psychopathy refers to one element of the so called dark triad of related negative personality traits, the other two being Machiavellianism and narcissism. So that's the thing. Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli, if you can't remember who he is, just remember this phrase: the end justifies the means. That's how I always remember him because that tells you more about him than anything else. Basically, I have a goal. I will do whatever it takes to get to that goal. If that means stabbing people in the back, fucking people over, if that's what I have to do, I'll do it. You know, the end justifies the means. That's perfect phrase. And that's exactly how someone with the dark triad personality type would act. So narcissistic, I want what I want, and I don't give a fuck about anything else. What I want, I'm going to get, and I'm going to stab anyone in the back who gets in my way. You know, because it's not just a big violent criminal. You know, there's people who you'd look at and you think, oh, they don't look like they could be a psychopath because they look so sweet and innocent. And there's actually a channel I'd like to look at and show you how it can be different, and so you can protect yourselves. I don't recommend going down the rabbit hole with this because it can be quite depressing to think that there are so many people out there like this. But I also think I'm sick of autism getting a bad label as it is, and to have the two intertwined really pisses me off because it's just another negative stereotype that we don't need on top of a condition that's already very stigmatized. You know, and I'm struggling a lot recently. You know, a lot of my problems are because I give a shit about other people, and I'm getting it wrong because I'm bad at reading the situation. Maybe they're not explaining to me like they should, but I'm just trying. You know, I'm trying my best with what limited ability I have. I would say, if anything, people with autism are very vulnerable to people like this because A lot of times, if someone tells you they're great at something and they're very convincing and they're very manipulative, I use it in rugby terms. You know, rugby is a great example because there were loads of guys who would say, "Oh, have you seen this fella play? He's amazing." The guy would be very confident and very arrogant, you know. And if anyone said anything about him, he would go after that person and attack them and try and put them down, like pipe down you, shut up. Not saying he's a psychopath, but I'm just saying a lot of what they describe here are common tactics used by people who are like this. They're not actually better at what they do. You know, you'll see it in the workplace as well. And they call it the corporate psychopath, Gordon Gecko, you know, where he says, when asked by Bud Fox, Charlie Sheen's character, when is enough ever enough? As in money. He explains it's not about money, it's about winning. And that kind of gives you an insight into everything you need to know. I don't care about the money. All I care about is being top dog or top gecko because I'm up here. So anyone that challenges me has to be put in their place. And the reason why they're good at getting into positions of power is because they don't have the worries of how would somebody feel or, you know, this is going to come back to bite me in the arse. They just have their goal, tunnel vision, and that's all they want to achieve. And if they see an attractive woman, they'll say whatever it takes to get in their knickers, you know. Sorry to be crude, but they don't care how the people are affected. They know it's wrong, but they just don't give a shit, you know. And getting back to my point, I seem to be the only one who could see through the bullshit, you know, and that was dangerous to people. So it is exhausting, and I don't recommend you kind of start diagnosing people and think, oh, is he a narcissist? Is he a psychopath? Because you'll be exhausted and you'll see things in people, you know. They don't have to have a personality disorder to be a very toxic person, is what I'm getting at here. Um, Someone who starts acting like a child, my own personal experience, when you have them banged to rights. So I'd have a friend who I would consider quite narcissistic, you know. He's always been up here, and anyone who went against him, he'd always make sure to slag them off and put them back in their place. He's always be very demanding as well. Like I gave the example before, but I was at a friend from college. I was at her parents' house and we were having a barbecue, and I had a bit of a hangover, so I was comfortable where I was and I was enjoying the company. But he only had one other fella with him, and he called me. And then I said, "Sorry, mate, I'm at a barbecue," and he was like, "Ditch that." And I was like, "No." And then he said, "We're longer mates," and you see how he kind of tried to blackmail me. And I've gotten better at going, "No, I'm not comfortable doing this. I'm not doing it," which will get you far in life, trust me. But see how he just demanded it like that, like expected me to drop everything for him. That's the thing. And other people would go along with what he wanted. I've only just made a video talking about this shit, but I have never been like this. Maybe a bit of an arsehole, yes, 100% argumentative, absolutely. Um, but I would say I'm more emotionally driven than anything else. If I had friends, I always wanted to get all my friends together and have a group of friends and everybody getting along. I could never understand ganging up on one person or everybody making an effort to put one person down. Usually happened with me, you know, because it was different. I'm easier. But when you actually remove yourself from the equation, what you'll find is a lot of people will start inviting you out because they actually realize, oh, he's actually a good laugh. He brings something different to the table. Maybe we shouldn't have slagged him off so badly. Maybe. Too late though. In some cases. But with the whole rugby thing, everybody would tell me this guy's great. And then I'd be like, I don't see it. And then they'd instantly be going, oh, you're just jealous. He's amazing and you're shit. And I'd be like, just because I said the guy's not as great as you say he is, that means I'm jealous, and now you're saying I'm shit. And you know what I mean? It's like they start attacking your character on behalf of that person. Flying monkeys, as they call them. Someone who comes in with swagger and bravado, and they're great at telling other people what to do, which can be seen as good leadership skills. But a good leader also admits when they're wrong, and these fuckers don't seem capable of doing that. I would simply say I've played against this guy, and I don't think he's as great as you say he is, and yet that's me being jealous. I'm not allowed to have an opinion. I have to say he's good and just blindly follow everybody else, or else I'm being jealous, apparently. And I would say that's the thing with autism, where we're able to look at stuff objectively and think, everybody's telling me this, so I kind of like, I'm expecting this level, but I'm only getting this. And it's not living up to the hype. I would tend to call things as I saw them instead of just licking someone's arse for the sake of it. No, over the years, I've kind of gone, this is what I'm supposed to do. So, in order to blend in, you talk shite and you learn to mask, and at the cost of your own well being, you know. You're not going to be very well liked when you tell the truth because you have to lie to everyone. And that's the thing in a world where everything is about what you can portray versus what actually exists. Like dating is all about charming someone and giving a good first impression, which these guys are great at doing. Um, and also job interviews. It's all about charming people, but it's not necessarily the truth. We're rewarding people who are great at giving a first impression, but that doesn't speak to their character and what their true intentions are. And I'm seeing more and more people be more and more selfish. It seems like these people are really starting to have their own way even more, because if they don't get their own way, they make people's lives miserable and people give in to them, unfortunately. But here we are now. There is a long history of interest in the combination of personality traits and behaviors thought to indicate psychopathy. Psychologists frequently refer to the mask of sanity, an attempt to reinterpret the so-called psychopathic personality, 1941, by the American psychiatrist Harvey Cleckley. Is it meant to be Harvey? I don't know. As an early and careful description of the disorder. Early editions of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, the publication of the American Psychiatric Association, used terms sociopathic personality disturbance, antisocial personality, and antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, which we now have, is used to classify traits and behaviours associated with psychopathy. The fifth edition of the manual, the DSM-5, 2013, identified psychopathy as a specific form of ASPD, but did not list psychopathy itself as a clinical diagnosis. All right, so it's a specific form of ASPD. That's a better description of it. That's news to me as well. It's my first time learning that. That approach reflects a lack of consensus on the definition of psychopathy, including its boundaries and features, as further manifested by the proliferation of competing methodologies for assessing, diagnosing, and treating the disorder. Indeed, psychologists have developed a variety of checklists that clearly define psychopathy for use in clinical, research, and criminal justice settings. Experts in many fields are motivated to pursue research on psychopathy because it is a major public health problem. It will be. One study published in 2011 estimated the social costs of criminal psychopathic behaviour in the United States, including the costs of property damage and related expenditures for police, courts, prisons, and so on, at 460 billion US dollars per year in 2009. Fuck. Such costs do not include those associated with healthcare for victims of psychopathic criminals. And I think that'll tell you all you need to know right there. Like, all of their data gathered is based on prisons, courts, and police. But what about the poor victims of these people? The people that they fuck over financially, beat up, you know? Like, these are people with little or no conscience. They can tell us that they have a conscience and give us the belief that they do, but we seem to be naive and think that we're going to see it coming. If they weren't good at what they did, they wouldn't keep getting away with stuff. See people's rap sheets, their criminal history, and you wonder how they've enough time in the day to commit that many crimes. But this is exactly why cluster B personality disorders get all the attention, and cluster A and cluster C don't, because they don't affect other people so negatively. There are 10 personality disorders in total, 3 in cluster A, 4 in cluster B, which is what antisocial personality disorder would fall into, and then 3 in cluster C. So cluster A would be, it's odd or eccentric. You have schizoid, and then you have schizotypal, which is like seen as a precursor for schizophrenia. And then you have paranoid personality disorder, which there's not an awful lot known about them because they don't present very often for treatment, because their problems typically don't affect other people. From my own understanding, paranoid personality disorder would be the most associated in cluster A with violence, but usually because they're so paranoid, they don't trust anybody. So they tend to withdraw and retreat. Bobby Fischer, the chess player, was said to have it. People say that Alex Jones also has it, the conspiracy theorist, the government mind control program. And it does seem like he actually believes his own bullshit most of the time. Then cluster B, you have antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. So these are people who typically cause harm to others and impact more people's lives. Hence the reason why there's such a focus on them, is they tend to not stick to themselves. They tend to abuse other people. And I say that as someone who, as I said, has borderline traits. It's now known as emotionally unstable personality disorder in some places. FYI. Cluster C is avoidant personality disorder. You have obsessive compulsive personality disorder, not to be confused with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And usually, I heard the difference being that the person with OCD knows that their habits are maladaptive and they have intrusive thoughts, but the person with OCPD, the personality disorder, typically doesn't see anything wrong necessarily. It's more pervasive, and they have to have order and a semblance, Not to say that they're always clean freaks, they can be hoarders as well, but I've heard it described that the difference between narcissistic personality disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder is that the person with NPD, narcissist, will correct you and demand that you do things right because they're perfect and they're your boss. They lord over you. They don't keep the same standards that they expect others to have. Or someone with OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, will expect high standards and to have everything neat and in order, but they will uphold those standards themselves. I believe. And then you also have dependent personality disorder. And basically, these are the discouraged, anxious, and withdrawn group. So avoidant, people who need constant reassurance and won't go anywhere if they're afraid of being looked down on. Very anxious. It's often confused with social anxiety, and our friend Autism, but it's not. And I made a video talking about that too. Dependent personality disorder is more like, and this is from what I gather, if anyone has these disorders, please definitely let us know about it. Any of them, any of them at all. Because anyone who's willing to seek treatment and help, especially if you lack empathy, and let's not beat around the bush. People who are labeled as a psychopath, we all look at them as a monster in some way or look down on them. If they're willing to get treatment and help, or if they're a narcissist and they're willing to get treatment and help, then good on them. But I would still advise you be very careful around people like this. And I've heard people with the disorders say that they say, I have to limit my interactions with people because I cannot help myself but manipulate and exploit, which is good self awareness, but it's also terrifying that they sometimes can't help it. I think it's a pervasive pattern. So, psychopathy is a disorder consisting of a suite of dysfunctional personality traits and behaviors that may include low levels of empathy, not none, but very low levels, no, like low remorse or inhibition, and high levels of manipulativeness, superficial charm, and impulsiveness. High levels, meaning they're very good at what they do. Some people with psychopathy have a grandiose sense of self worth and engage in pathological lying and promiscuity. Psychopathic behavior can include criminal and violent acts, but this is not always the case. Psychologists note that psychopathic behaviors vary in intensity and frequency from one individual to another and over time. Moreover, there is a subclinical population that exhibits psychopathic traits and behaviors at a much lower level. Although the prevalence of psychopathy varies depending upon where and how it is measured, the disorder is estimated to affect 1% of the general population. Psychopathy is more common in men than in women, and then vice versa. Borderline is more common in women than men, although we are more biased towards domineering in men. That's what we see. Men are more domineering and confident and grandiose. It's no surprise that narcissistic personality disorder is more common in men than women as well, whereas the more neurotic and emotional personality disorders like borderline and histrionic are more female diagnosed. So, children at risk of developing the disorder may have behavioral problems that affect their family life, friendships, and education. Adults who suffer from psychopathy may have trouble holding jobs and maintaining personal relationships and can experience legal problems stemming from their reckless or criminal conduct. In addition, people with the disorder frequently develop health problems related to substance abuse because they're impulsive, they want sensations, they're thrill seeking. They tend to lack a range of emotions, so they have to constantly be getting the dopamine hit. They're very poor impulse control as well. Psychopathy increases the likelihood of criminal behaviors such as homicide, murder, and sadistic violence. Not all individuals with the disorder are violent, however. No, and it's important to state that. Accordingly, the proportion of people with psychopathy in prison populations is far greater than the proportion in the general population. It would be, yeah, because it's criminal behavior. Estimates of psychopathy in prison populations ranges from 16 to 25% amongst men and from 7 to 17% amongst women. However, psychologists warn that the relationship between psychopathy and violence is complicated, which makes violent behavior by individuals with the disorder difficult to predict. Just because someone's violent doesn't mean that they have antisocial personality disorder. FYI. Both genetic and environmental factors contribute to the development of psychopathy. Twin and adoption studies have shown that psychopathic traits are heritable, meaning that it runs in families. But something might need to unlock it. Many studies explore how candidate genes related to neurotransmitters such as serotonin or hormones such as oxytocin influence psychopathic traits, but there is no clear discrete set of genes that cause psychopathy. So it's a combination. Several areas of the brain have been found to be involved in the development of psychopathy. For example, abnormalities in the amygdala and hippocampus often occur in psychopathy. Yeah, they don't tend to have the same fight or flight response, so feel that sense of fear. You know, if we've done something wrong, they don't. They tend to have very limited sense of fear and anxiety, and they also tend to go more for the fight response instead of the flight or freeze. By the looks of it. But the relation between psychopathy and brain development is complex and remains a subject of investigation. A child's home and social environments can have a major influence on the development of psychopathic traits. Growing up in a traumatic or stressful setting and being subjected to harsh discipline or abuse have been correlated with increased levels of psychopathic behavior. In contrast, growing up in a consistently warm environment with positive reinforcement can effectively extinguish some antisocial tendencies predicted by predicted by heredity. Sorry. So basically, what I'm saying is, you might have someone who has the tendency towards psychopathy, but if they're raised in a loving environment, then you're at a better chance of not letting it develop. The risk goes down, essentially. So, psychotherapy is a treatment, such as cognitive behavior therapy, often used to treat adults suffering from psychopathy. However, many psychologists consider the disorder to be extremely resistant to treatment. Again, if they don't see themselves as having a problem, how are they going to get better? The current consensus is that the best way to treat it is to identify psychopathic tendencies in childhood, at which point intervention may be able to mitigate those tendencies, thus prevent psychopathic behaviors later in life. Catch it early. That seems to be what everybody says. And okay. All right. Animal cruelty and setting fires. So that's linked in childhood. It's kind of like the early warning signs. So it's higher in prison populations. It's characterized by a pervasive pattern of disregard for the feelings of others and often accompanied by violation of the rights of others through negligence or overt action. Basically, what that means is, as I talked about Jake the Bus, he doesn't care about his child. You know, he doesn't give a shit that his kid's been beaten up, which would be negligence. But there's also over aggression, actively beating someone up. You know, so yeah, it's often associated with serial killers, but it's not always the case. Not everybody with antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy will be a serial killer. But here we are now. So behaviors linked to the development of antisocial personality disorder appear in childhood, including animal cruelty. So most of us wouldn't imagine kicking or hitting a dog, you know. Maybe if it bit us, we might do it, but these are just going out, you know, thrill seeking, hurting animals, and then an inclination towards setting fires. And they have a problem with the law at an early age. And then as a child, you'd be diagnosed with conduct disorder. And if it develops as an adult, you have antisocial personality disorder. They often have paranoid thinking because they think that everybody thinks like them, which is, it's a dog eat dog world, and I have to take what I can get, you know. They only see the world from their eyes. They haven't got very good emotional empathy, but they can read what other people are expressing. Those who are affected by antisocial personality disorder have great difficulty conforming to social norms and rules making it very difficult for them to maintain employment and function within a family. If you can't take direction or authority from anybody, you're going to struggle in life, because you're not always going to be top dog, and they can't do well with authority. They typically don't take orders very well. High risk novelty seeking behavior, often associated with substance abuse. Because of these behaviors, they are much more likely to die prematurely or to experience disability associated with vehicular accidents and homicide or suicide attempts. So they're more likely to commit suicide, which most people are surprised to hear. How do they differ from narcissists? That's an interesting one. So, serious violations of criminal laws, deceitfulness, or for personal gain, or just simply for pleasure, just because they can, including lying, swindling, or trickery, con men, people who con others out of their money, very antisocial, impulsiveness or failure to plan ahead, irritability or aggressiveness, often resulting in physical assaults, reckless disregard for the safety of oneself or others, failure to meet important adult responsibilities, including job and family related duties and financial obligations, and lack of meaningful remorse or guilt to the point of complete indifference regarding the serious harm or distress one's actions cause other people. So, when it talks about not meeting financial responsibilities or jobs, there's a channel that I watch, and she was talking, and she's a diagnosed sociopath with narcissistic traits. She talks about having an upset stomach and being put in an office where she didn't feel she deserved a better office because she, by her own admission, is quite entitled. And she just left. She said she was going home. The people in the job assumed that it was her first day. She didn't feel well, so she's going back to her apartment where she was staying. But she said, no, I flew home and didn't tell the job, didn't care either, just left. She just wasn't bothered. Other characteristics associated with APD are pronounced lack of empathy, a tendency to be contemptuous of the rights, interests, or feelings of others, and excessively high self appraisal. That's just like I was talking about, arrogance, conceitedness, or cockiness. I'm better than you. And the thing as well is, and what this woman would talk about, she expected all these things of other people. She expected loyalty. She expected them to provide, to have something to bring to the table, and stuff to give to her. She never once mentioned what she could bring to the table or what she could give to them. She talked about being sexually abused, which is terrible, but then she's talked about how she knew that men were looking at her, and she would pretend that she was struggling financially, even if she wasn't, to get a free dinner out of them. It's kind of like you brought that on yourself or didn't learn from your mistakes. Not that I think anyone should ever be abused, but if on one hand you're saying, I deserve all this, and I'm going to fake whatever you want in order to get a free dinner out of you, and then say I was abused, and I'm not saying it's right that it happened, but people like this, they expect stuff, and they don't give anything back. That's why it's called parasitic in nature. So it shares features of narcissistic personality disorder. They generally lack empathy and tend to have unrealistic unrealistically high opinions of themselves, and like psychopaths, narcissists tend to form shallow relationships to exploit and manipulate others and to be glib and superficial charming. Unlike many persons with ASPD, however, narcissists are generally not impulsive, aggressive, or habitually deceitful. So they can hold off on that a bit more, and they're often deceitful to get something, not just for the sake of it. Or someone with ASPD or psychopath, sociopath will just lie for the sake of it. There's an interesting interview on Soft White Underbelly. It's titled Nihilist. Everybody was like, it should be titled Narcissist or Psychopath. And the guy, Jay, on it actually appears in a Spot the Psychopath test. He has a crutch and it looks like a dyke cut, is what we would have called it in school. That's what it was called. It's just that they commonly had it. And I remember seeing this guy and I thought, he's overweight and he's on a walking stick, but he's talking about how he was going to be valedictorian, a straight A student. He was captain of the football team. Just generally quite unlikable, especially because of his lack of empathy. He says anyone who's depressed is depressed because they're a failure, and he knows it all. He knows more than everybody else. He was going to be so successful. Yeah, he just thought he was so much better than everybody else. But you can see as well that he talks about stuff like bullying in school, and it seemed like he was about to talk about his own experience, and then he just started talking shit for the sake of it. So that's the habitual lying and deceitfulness, and he was able to deceive everyone that he was the psychopath, you know, and probably played on the fact that he was injured on a walking stick a bit more, because people always assume those that are disabled physically couldn't do any harm, and it just goes to show. So narcissists are not generally impulsive, aggressive, or habitually deceitful, nor do they characteristically display conduct disorder during childhood or crime behavior in adulthood. Narcissists also characteristically manifest a compelling need for the admiration, esteem, or envy of others, a trait not displayed by persons with antisocial personality disorder. Interesting. Okay. So, just a few channels of people who actually have the disorder. So we go in now. Sorry, go back. Now. Should I just accept being lonely? No. This fella here, a Belgian fella, so in this interview here, I won't go into it now, but he talks about one thing that I really want to just highlight is how he talks about his sister. So he talks very casually about how she was drowning in a pool. And his thought was, it's actually baffling to say it, but instead of jumping in to save her, his thought was, but my clothes are clean and I'm dry. So eventually he held out a stick for her and pulled her to the shore. But his instinct wasn't, oh shit, I need to jump in and save her. It was, my clothes are clean. She's in the water. It's her own fault, you know? And credit to him for being so honest, but he doesn't care. So why would he feel the need to say anything else? Here we are now. See, we're playing in the family pool. We slid. My mom was inside the house. She was cooking something for us, and I remember it was a sunny day. And we were playing near the farm in the pool. She fell in, and I looked at her. I didn't jump into the pool. I was not stressed. I was not anxious. My heart doesn't skip a beat. I was looking at her, and at one moment, I was like, maybe I need to do something. How many of us would be like, fuck, I need to hop in and save my sister? I mean, yeah, it's not very flattering, but and then this channel here, yeah, she is a diagnosed sociopath and narcissist, and she talks quite openly. And credit to anyone being honest about this because it's not a very good thing to be called. She says, "Look, we have to look after what we do with other people. We have to be careful not to manipulate. Our behaviors are not good, and we have to watch them." But she can be very like this. So I'd like to apologize for being away so long and be very come across as very bubbly and outgoing. But then in another way, she talks about doing some horrible things. So I'll be honest, I was expecting them to be worse when she was talking about them, but she'll talk about manipulating friends to get what she wants, manipulating family members, or, how she broke up with her boyfriend on his birthday and then didn't see anything wrong with that. Didn't care that it was his birthday either when she found out. And then another thing, she was talking about being over in a family member's, or sorry, it was her parents' place. So I think she's half Indian, and she was staying over in her grandparents' place, and she was talking about having tenants. So obviously, said there was a bit of money in the family, and I think she was a beauty queen or something like that. But she said she was 11, and there was one of the tenants was an older lady who bought her a Barbie doll or something nice. So to thank her, she poured oil on the floor and wrote a letter from one of the labourers in the complex. And the way she spoke about him was real condescending. Like most labourers in India don't even speak English. So she was kind of like, how did your one not know it wasn't him? And she blamed it on him. And the poor lady slipped and really badly hurt herself. Now, she does acknowledge that I know you'll probably hate me after hearing these stories, but there's no emotion in her face. And she's kind of just like, so what? Who wants to feel remorse and guilt? Well, I agree with you on that. I'd say it'd be very nice not to feel remorse or guilt, but that's what separates us from purely selfish people. The woman did something nice for me, so I made up a lie that a fella working in the building tried to hurt her while I was pouring oil on the ground to injure her. She also talks about how much she exploits people in relationships, but she never says what she can give back to them. It's always me, 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 what I want, which baffles me. And I'm kind of there thinking, all right, must be nice. So software underbelly nihilist. This interview here, and I have to admit that I wasn't expecting that interview. I wasn't expecting him to be so unlikable. it's just the way he talked about being the best at everything. And you're just looking at him and you're thinking, like, I'm overweight, yeah, but he's overweight on a crutch now. Things haven't gone great, and he's just talking how wonderful he is and how he robo tripping, basically making yourself stupid so that you can get on with everybody else. And here you can read it. He doesn't believe in the chemical stuff of depression. I'll just read that now. That's one of the biggest things. I don't believe in chemical depression. Like people say they have. I've got depression, so I can't do things. I actually don't believe that's a thing because most of the people I know who say they're depressed have a reason. And if you have a reason, it's not a disease. Like if you're a kid who couch trips and doesn't shower, and you have the not on purpose dreadlocks, and you're drunk from the second you wake up, and you're high, and meth all day, and you can't get a job, and you don't have an apartment, and you're depressed. You should be. You're a failure. Failure is depressing. I mean, in fairness, I can see his point there. If you're coming out for sex work and you work as a real estate secretary now and don't make the same money, right? Okay, you can check that out, but you'll see how self-aggrandizing he is. At that point, I kind of agree, but it's kind of built up from he's not a very empathetic person, put it that way, and he talks about how I was going to be valedictorian, top student, top athlete, and I quote said I was going to be captain of the football team, American football, date raping cheerleaders, and then he laughs about that and it's kind of like, oh, okay. So it's not surprising to then also see him appear in this, um, dating a nihilist. Guess the psychopath. That's what we call it. Not as easy to guess the psychopath as the white person. There he is, right there. Now, it never actually said that he was a psychopath, but I knew from the instant that I saw him there that he was going to be it because of how he carried himself in that. I just thought he was so about his own self importance. If anyone's wondering, I'm fascinated on research in Bernard Nocht Institute of Medicine. I was looking at studying there, particularly microbiology. Big fan. I also love the movie Contagion. I'm obsessed, because I'm afraid there's going to be another global pandemic. Also, be watching a lot of Louis Suarez recently. Niall McConnell for Greg Belt, and then Adult with Autism Paul. And I'll just go into him because I really like this guy. I'm a big fan of his work, and I relate to a lot of what he's going through. And I can feel his pain. And he talks about it, and it's like he clearly cares about people. I tried to do a video about motivation, but wasn't overly motivated to do it. Yeah, I understand the intro waffle as well, Paul. I get it completely. Really good channel there. And we'll just give a shout out to some of the good channels and why I like them. This fella too, I really like. Bit more quirky and wacky, but in a good way. Obviously, it's the sage, and my mum loves her sage, and it definitely works. I like the smell of sage. And executive dysfunction, just when you can't function in daily life, it's not laziness, making tasks easier. So there's good advice there. And then there's another channel I want to give a shout out to, Autistic. Quinn. I feel bad for Paul Quinn because I know he's sharing a story recently that this one it's not very nice, and it talks about mistreatment by family members. You don't see him harming an animal, you see him loving an animal. Iota. What I will just say on that though is because we're constantly told we're wrong and we have people in our lives as autistic people, and it's not ever, sorry, one sec. Okay. Thanks. Okay, we're all good. We often mimic the behavior we see from other people that we trust. So if they're abusive to an animal or they're not very nice to animals, not saying that we shouldn't hold ourselves accountable, but I found that as a kid, I tended to mimic what everybody else was doing because I thought that was what you're supposed to do. Because I was always told you're wrong, the way you view the world is wrong. So that's the reason, you know. And I want this guy I really like Kiora Fanu and Bula Vanaka. Maori and Fijian. Hope you're doing well. So I want to check out the Pacific Island guy. I really like this fella. And I find him a very empathetic guy. But what I would like to just say is why autism is not psychopathy. So getting back to the point of the video, and actually why I just gonna share again. So share. For anyone who doesn't know Jake the most, it's this guy. Tamura Morrison. This guy to the left. That's his son there when they find out that Grace, his daughter, has killed herself. And he goes ape shit at Uncle Bully, aka Cliff Curtis. There he is. And that's the pub fight, so I might just even look at that for a second. So there's an attractive woman singing, and he sees the guy, and he goes over to approach him, and there's no fear in his eyes. He just batters him. When his son, that was his son there. Huck, I think his name is Huck. Fellow with the face tattoo. When he gets beaten up by a gang, he's not interested. He doesn't care. He also doesn't care when his son's gone to court and has been arrested. He just says he can deal with it himself. He doesn't even bother showing up to support him. He's a tough guy, you know. Jake the most, but he's a selfish guy too. And he doesn't ever listen to his wife until his daughter Grace kills herself. And that's very tragic. There he is now. Tamar Morrison's a good guy, FYI. So the guy who plays Jake the Most is not a bad guy. He's actually an okay guy. He plays Boba Fett in. Yeah. He wanted everyone to feel on edge as he got to punch me when playing Jake the Bus. Anyway, I would never feel fearless going into any confrontation. That's why I'm getting at that all the time, because it takes a lot out of me. And if I'm doing it on someone else's behalf, I don't want to do it, but I do it anyway for somebody else, You've got to stand up for yourself as well. And I advocate for that all the time because you've got to. Sadly, a lot of people will just let you get walked all over. And I want to actually show another thing. It's coming to me, so I just want to show it. But John Barnes, really, and that kind of upset me because he's a nice guy, John Barnes, but very few people actually helped him out when they should have done, and it was bad form by his supposed friends. So he was talking about people he couldn't forgive because they never helped him out, they never stood up for him, even when it was his own team. And that's just wrong, A bit of empathy goes a long way. So he just couldn't forgive certain players. But when bananas were thrown at players, yeah, he forgived the ignorant tradesman, that was thrown from the stand, the working class racist, as he said, on the terrace, because he understood their conditioning. But he cannot forgive the men who stood beside him in the dressing room and said nothing, the ones who knew better, the ones who had power, and the ones who chose silence. Played in an era where acknowledging racism meant breaking the rank, it meant being soft or political. His teammates would see bananas thrown at Goodison Park where Everton play in 1988 and call it banter. They didn't boo the ref, they booed him as a player. Silence was not ignorance, it was maintenance. By refusing to name the problem, his teammates made Barnes the problem. They let him carry the burden alone whilst they preserved their comfort. Barnes has said if the team walked off the pitch, they would be out of work. But the offer was never made, not by Dish, not by Rush, not by Hansen. Alan Hansen and Ian Rush, I don't know, Dish, Dalgleish, I think Kenny Dalgleish. And you can see that, like, big name players, I feel for them because, like, there are some people who say, oh, just stop sharing that. There are people who say that racism is bad, and I'll be honest, that sometimes they go on about it when it's nothing. Whereas with John Barnes' experience was quite bad, and I feel for him, even though I'm not the same race as him. You know what I mean? I'm not from the same country as him, even. But I can feel his pain and his hurt. I'm able to put myself in his shoes because I don't know exactly what he's feeling. Of course not, because I'm not Caribbean. I'm not black, and I'm not from the Caribbean, and I didn't play for England in football. But the strength it took for him not to blame the racist in the terrace and to go, he doesn't have any of the power. He's conditioned that way. And then to go, my teammates should have stood up for me because they had the power, you know, walk off the field with me in solidarity, and they would do it, because that meant breaking rank or losing a day's pay. These are not easy things to do, but someone who has empathy will do it. And it might not always get you the result you want, but you have to do it for the people you care about. But it shows you most people chose not to do anything. Like, I think it's a testament to how selfish the world has become. It's not always going to win you fans. People who are selfish and psychopathic and narcissistic in nature do not care about anybody else but themselves for the most part. And I've heard people who are self aware enough to say it. They say they're extremely selfish, but they are working on themselves. And look, power to them, more power to them. It takes a lot of balls to do that, but if we don't have a united front and start standing up for what we believe in, people who don't have fear about getting what they want, don't care about other people's opinions, just want what they want, they'll just keep taking. Autistic people, we burn out because we take on the burden of the world. We feel things on a much stronger level. And I've heard lots of people say this. Tell me how that's psychopathic. We literally take on other people's problems and that feel the weight of the world, the pain of the world. I can feel it right now. I feel burnt out because the world is suffering. I don't feel reassured when someone tells me that everybody's suffering, so you should feel better about yourself. You're not alone. I understand where they're coming from. I understand it's from an empathetic point of view, but as someone who is empathetic, and I'm not going to say I'm an empath and all that crap, I'm just going to say someone who has empathy for other human beings suffering. If you tell me everyone's suffering, that just makes me feel worse. It might make me feel like I'm not alone. And to have someone who has suffered who tells me how they cope with that is great, yeah. But to just have a bunch of people suffering and struggling in life, that does not make me feel better because I feel so bad for the person who's suffering. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's a very selfish way of looking. It's like I'm not as bad as that guy, which is not what you should be saying. Getting so overwhelmed by thinking about it, that does that not show you? You know, and sometimes, and I've been going down a rabbit hole with these videos recently and watching psychopaths non-stop and sociopaths and thinking, would it be easier if I was this way? Then I'd get what I wanted and I'd be top of the food chain, you know. But remorse and guilt are horrible emotions. They feel terrible, yes. But you can't learn from something if you don't feel remorse. If you don't feel guilt, then you never learn to change your behavior, which is why they just keep reoffending and reoffending, you know. It's an interesting scene. Last one, I promise. Girl interrupted. Great movie, by the way. Girl farts. What the fuck is wrong with people? I want the full movie, but we'll definitely watch it again. Susanna has borderline personality disorder, and Lisa, who's also in the same mental health facility, is a diagnosed sociopath. Susanna's played by Winona Ryder, and Lisa is played by Angelina Jolie. Right there. And Daisy, played by, she's just got nothing. Here's the thing, Angelina Jolie rules the psych ward. She's loud, she's obnoxious. Everybody kind of sucks up to her. That intense stare in her eyes. But he said this scene was good because then another fella who seems to want to be a psychopath, Professor Sam Vaknin. I would agree with him that it's a masterpiece of a movie. Girl Interrupted. I also like this channel, Dr. Elliot. Sam Vaknin there almost seems to want to be a psychopath, and there's a documentary done about him, and he seems to be saying never fuck over a psychopath, or he seems very controlled and put together when he's doing his own videos. But then when you see him interacting with the documentary filmmaker, whenever his authority is questioned, he's so quick in and like, no, that didn't happen, or you're wrong. And he becomes quite childish whenever his authority is questioned. And every expert that he goes to see who questions his credentials, he always brings a book, a signed copy of his book, to show how wonderful he is. But whenever they question his PhDs and One of the universities he got his PhD from is now defunct. But whenever that's brought up, he goes, "I want to see your credentials," and instantly attack mode, which is a real insight. I will just show you. Sorry, last time I promise. Just so you can watch it and see for yourself. We'd be here all day if I did it, but here it is. And as I say, he sounds very well put together when he's doing the documentary or the videos himself. But in the end, yeah, this one, My Life as a Psychopath, Malignant Self Love, is his book if you want to buy it. But he's very much questioning anyone who questions his authority. It's like, I want to see proof of your. He doesn't question their PhDs before they question his. He's handed them the signed copy of the book because they're important people that he wants to impress. But as soon as he's questioned, "Oh, let me see yours," that's deflected from him instantly. Someone with autism is usually not going to do that. Facts might be important to us, but usually we're interested in something, we become very good and knowledgeable on the subject and take little interest in anything else, which can come off as quite narcissistic. I understand. I would recommend that most autistic people broaden their horizons because you can come off as quite a know it all if you know everything about one subject and won't have yourself questioned on it. You can be quite a know it all, but then don't take interest in anything else. It's voice is gone. Point of the matter is autism is a neurological developmental disorder, neurodevelopmental. We struggle to pick up on people's emotions, but once we know, we try to help. A psychopath will pick up on them and then look to manipulate. The hands are up because it's like a puppet master. Think of it like me and poor Julius here. I have full control and I squeeze him. I own him. I am his master. But I don't think autistic people want to control everyone and everything, but rules are important. Having a sense of order in this chaotic world is important for us. Trying to make sense of everything, and it seems to be getting harder and harder to do that, which is why a lot of high functioning autistic people are burning out. I think it's never been better to thrive if you're selfish and arrogant, don't care about community, because communities are dying. People like this, psychopaths, they don't do well in communities because they manipulate, use, and abuse people. It's weird that in Western society we look down on Eastern societies, but instead of labeling it as a mental health disorder or a personality disorder, I should say, they see it as someone who was shunned by a community. And actually, I think that's a better way of looking at it. Autistic people might not do well in a community because we struggle with people, we get anxious with people, we struggle to be fake. Whereas a psychopath is excellent at being fake. I would argue it's all they know how to do is to be fake, shallow and get what they want. Whereas an autistic person, we want more genuine connection, not fake, meaningless connection. We want actual, deep, meaningful love, not fake friends and people just to have a numbers game. We don't want submission. We want equality. Look at me, I'm getting all profound. We want just to be seen as equal, you know, and respected by other people. But we don't want to dominate everybody and take from everybody else and destroy everybody else's rights. We just want to be equal. And I'll leave it there. That's a good place to leave it. Slán go fóill, guys. Stay well.